Well, good morning, everyone. Happy Friday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings here on Now TV. My name is Don K. Preston. I'm the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. And I'm sitting here really enjoying the nice, warm snuggle, dressed in a nice, warm sweater and what have you. At the time I'm filming this, which is about 2.5 weeks before it will actually air, we've got almost half an inch of black ice on the ground here in southern Oklahoma. And I want to tell you, the roads have been absolutely treacherous. Now, some of you may live in regions where you don't experience black ice. And I've got to tell you, here in southern Oklahoma, we don't get it all that often. About, I don't know, 14, 15 years ago, we had an ice storm in which, pardon me, we got close to an inch of nothing but drizzle rain that froze immediately. And we got, an inch of black ice. Well, black ice is the slickest form of ice to be found. And you would not believe the devastation of the trees, power lines. It was unbelievable. You'd drive along and you'd see these areas of woods and forest, and they were just devastated. Limbs were everywhere. And, I used to drive a truck years ago. It never was stuck in ice or snow, but that was some of the most treacherous driving I've ever experienced. And what we are experiencing this day that I'm filming this is about equally as treacherous. It's really, really bad. So hope you're not experiencing that where you are. It's just bad. Now, here we are, like I said, I'm filming a couple of weeks ahead of time, and it's this morning as I film. It is currently about I think it's about 23, 21, 23 degrees. Pardon me. And we've got a wind chill factor of 0 to 5, 10, something like that. Thankfully, the wind's not blowing a lot. Now, by Friday, and I'm filming this on a Wednesday, by Friday, it's supposed to be 55 degrees. That's kind of the nature of weather in southern Oklahoma. Well, anyway, thank you again for joining me. I appreciate that so very, very much. And by the way, thank you so much for those on YouTube who have been making comments along in appreciation for this series. Now, don't forget, folks, we are studying the challenge of Christ. The challenge of Christ is very, very simple. It is very powerful, and it is, in fact, very challenging. And it is this, John chapter 10, verse 37. Jesus was speaking to a hostile audience, and he said, "If I do not do the works which my Father has given me, do not believe me." Could anything be clearer? And yet, you know what? I've had people, number one, who didn't even know the challenge existed. When confronted with that challenge, and then confronted with the fact that Jesus said he was going to come back in power, great glory, on the clouds, with the angels, in flaming fire in the first century, they have actually said, well, no. That's not part of the challenge of Christ. The challenge of Christ has to do with his resurrection, has nothing to do with his return. Well, I'm sorry. That's one of those argumentum ad desperatum type of arguments that really, it just goes beyond the pale of ridiculousness. How would anybody say that the Father didn't tell the Son he was going to come back in judgment? Especially in the fact that Jesus said in John chapter 5, 21 and following, "From henceforth the Father judges no one, but has committed all judgment to the Son, that all men might honor the Son as they honor the Father. The Son can do nothing of himself, but what he sees the Father do, So that means the Father gave the prerogative authority to judge to the Son, meaning judgment was one of the things the Father gave him to do. You see the problem? Now, what I've been doing and what I've been sharing is the fact that the Bible set the time for the fulfillment of everything the Father gave the Son to do. The Old Testament writers set the time, the kairos. The word kairos means divinely designated time. It can even be used that way in a simple sense, that we have the time of the seasons of harvest, of spring, of summer. Okay? Well, you see, God appointed the sun, the moon, the stars, and set them in place to be for times, kairos, for seasons, for days, weeks, months, and years. So even on such a mundane level, God established the seasons. He set their times. But in eschatological matters, the judgment, the coming of the Lord, the resurrection. In eschatological matters, the Old Testament set the time for the last days. Now, I'm reiterating myself here. I understand that, but it's so critical that we understand this. Because the New Testament writers say they were living in the time, kairos, foretold by the Old Testament prophets. The Old Testament foretold the last days. New Testament writers tell us they were living in the last days. The Old Testament writers said that the eschatological consummation would arrive in the days of the Fourth Empire, Daniel chapter 2. The Fourth Empire was the days of Rome. And it would be in the days of those kings in which the God of heaven shall set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and it shall never pass away. Okay, so what is God doing? God was appointing the time, the kairos, for the establishment of the kingdom. What was the Fourth Empire from the days of Daniel? From the days of Nebuchadnezzar, because after all, Daniel was giving Nebuchadnezzar the dream and the interpretation of the dream. And he said, you, O king, are the head of gold. And there are going to be other kingdoms after you. There's going to be a fourth empire. It's in the days of that fourth empire, and you have Babylon, Medo-Persian, Greek, Roman. So in the days of the Roman Empire would be the time for the establishment of the kingdom. There would be no delay. There would be no postponement. There would not be a revived fourth empire. It's in the days of the fourth empire. That's the kairos. Likewise in Daniel chapter 7. And I'm trying to hurry here. In the days of Daniel chapter 7, fourth empire, once again, days of Babylon, taking us to the days of the fourth empire. And in the days of the fourth empire, the little horn would arise. The Ancient of Days would come, the coming of the Lord, the judgment. And destroy the little horn, and the kingdom would be given to the saints. That's Daniel chapter 2, verse 44. But what does that tell us? It tells us that the days of the fourth empire, the days of Rome, would be the days of the coming of the Lord, the judgment, inclusive of the resurrection and the establishment of the kingdom. Once again, it's not talking about a revived Roman Empire. It's not talking about a delayed kingdom. No hint, no suggestion, no implication of a revived Roman Empire or a delayed kingdom, a postponed kingdom in the days of the Fourth Empire. Well, let's face it, ladies and gentlemen, the Roman Empire, that fourth beast, does not exist today. So we got a choice, okay? We've got a choice. Either accept that the Lord came in judgment with a little horn, came and established the kingdom in power and glory in the first century, which is the time the New Testament writer said the time has been fulfilled. That Jesus himself said the time, the kairos, is fulfilled. The kingdom of heaven has drawn near. Mark 1:15. We can accept that and say, you know what? Maybe my concept of the nature of the kingdom has been wrong. Maybe my concept of a literal, nationalistic, quasi-militaristic, geopolitical kingdom has been in error. Maybe, after all, Jesus' kingdom was to be a kingdom not made with hands. Maybe it was to be a kingdom that would not come with observation, but it would be one that would be in the midst of men, and men wouldn't even recognize it. Luke 17:20 and follow. Maybe, just maybe, we should change our attitude about the nature of the coming of the Lord, the judgment, the resurrection, and the kingdom, or take the position of a man by the name of Mark Davis, who claimed to be a Church of Christ minister. I don't have any reason to doubt that, by the way. I don't have any record of it, but that doesn't mean a thing. Or we can take the position that Mr. Mark Davis did. He saw all of the time statements, all of the statements about the appointed time of the end. Now, very, very clearly, Mr. Davis was totally ignorant, number one, of covenantal language, number two, totally ignorant of Hebraic apocalyptic language, and he took the position, still takes the position, that Jesus and the biblical writers foretold the end of the world, the end of time. Jesus was going to come as a 5'5" Jewish man out of heaven and establish an earthly kingdom, or destroy literal physical heaven and earth. Well, he didn't do it, obviously, literally, physically, bodily. Therefore, Jesus failed. So Mr. Davis wrote a book, Broken Promises. Now, I told you that I was supposed to have a debate with Mr. Davis. Now, again, keep in mind that I'm filming about 2 weeks, maybe 3 ahead of time here. As of today, all right, as of today, and I'm filming on Wednesday, February the 1st, I've been corresponding with Mr. Davis and Derek Lambert, who is a former preterist, but he's now an atheist or agnostic or whatever you'd wish to call him. I'm not quite sure what he calls himself these days, except an unbeliever. Now, Derek offered to air the debate between Mr. Davis and me. He reached out to Mr. Davis. Mr. Davis said, yeah, he would debate me. Well, then, when I reached out to Mr. Davis and said, okay, let's do this, what are your propositions? Mr. Davis submitted a proposition to me that was so vague, so generic, so elastic and plastic, that no one with even a shred of a concept of debate and debate propositions would ever sign it. But he demanded I do so. Well, you know what? I have had more formal debates as a preterist than anyone else that I'm aware of. I didn't fall off the wagon yesterday. I wasn't born into the world of debate yesterday. And so for Mr. Davis to demand that I sign a proposition that is so vague, so generic, that it doesn't define a single term, leaves everything open-ended, to demand that I sign that proposition is totally unrealistic. I'm not naive. I'm not going to do it. So I submitted a counterproposal. He refused. I submitted the counterproposal again 4 days ago as I filmed this on February the 1st. He has not answered my proposal. I have contacted Mr. Lambert and said, you need to get a hold of Mr. Davis and urge him to accept my proposition, which is specific, well-defined, and proper and valid. After all, what I am asking Mr. Davis to do is to affirm, and he said he wanted to affirm what he says in the book. He says in his book, from the first of it to the last of it, Jesus predicted his coming, the judgment, the resurrection, the end of the age, etc., to occur in the first century. It did not occur, therefore Jesus lied and failed. He broke his promise. I want Mr. Davis to affirm Jesus lied, Jesus failed in his predictions of his coming, the judgment, and the resurrection. But he seems not to want to affirm what he says over and over and over in his book. Kind of strange, don't you think? So, all of that said, what I am setting before you in this series of lessons that's been going on for well over a year now, 2 years now, is that the Bible is very clear. It is very explicit. It is very undeniable in affirming that the coming of the Lord, judgment, and resurrection was to be in the first century at the appointed time. Now, one of the passages, we've looked at Daniel 2, we've looked at Daniel 7, we've begun an examination of Daniel chapter 9. Folks, there is not a clearer, more explicit prophecy of the appointed time in all of the Bible, than Daniel chapter 9. 70 weeks are determined upon your people and upon your city. Daniel was told. To do what? Make an end of sin, to make the atonement, to finish transgression, to seal vision and prophecy, etc., etc., etc. 6 constituent elements. Now, I want to set before you this idea, okay? I want you to see, and I'll vindicate this as we go along, that the prophecy of Daniel chapter 9, 24 and following is nothing less than a prophecy of the establishment of the kingdom, just like Daniel 2, just like Daniel chapter 7. Now, I don't know of very many people that would deny that, okay? I just don't know of very many people who would deny that. What most people do not grasp, and I wrote a book vindicating this claim, what most people do not grasp is that Daniel 9:24 foretold the time of the resurrection. You catch the power of that? Let me reiterate it. The prophecy of Daniel 9:24-27 foretold the resurrection of the dead. It foretold the kingdom. Okay, everybody says, yeah, Daniel chapter 9, verse 24 predicted the coming of the kingdom. I don't know of any dispensationalist that denies it, by the way. Now, there are lots and lots of amillennialists who believe that Daniel 9, the 70 weeks were fulfilled by 34-35 AD. They do not grasp. They do not comprehend. May I say this? They don't have a clue that Daniel 9 foretold the resurrection. They completely misapprehend the force, the power, the comprehensive nature of Daniel chapter 9. So, what I began sharing with you last week is that Daniel 9, these 6 constituent elements do in fact entail the eschatological consummation. By the way, let me get ahead of myself just a little bit, okay? I recently wrote a brand new book entitled Temple to Tell Us. So let me give you just a little bit. Now, the premise of that book is the Jerusalem temple would stand valid, the cultus would stand valid and imposed until the time of the Reformation. The time of the Reformation is the time of the resurrection, the time of the kingdom, the time of the judgment, the time of the coming of the Lord for salvation. Hebrews chapter 9, 10 through 28, okay? Since that temple no longer stands, that means that those things have been fulfilled or they failed. One of the two. There's no middle ground here. Well, guess what? If it's true that Daniel chapter 9 foretold the resurrection, that means that the resurrection had to occur by the time of the destruction of the city and the sanctuary, Daniel chapter 9, verse 26. Now, since very clearly that city and sanctuary was destroyed in AD 70, and you see, this can't be talking about the time of Antiochus Epiphanes. I have a lot to say about that later. And by the way, folks, I've got to hurry here. Don't forget, I have produced a multi-presentation series on the 70 weeks of Daniel chapter 9, 24 and following. I am unaware of any other study like it. The lessons are an average of 45 to 50 minutes long, examining in depth each of the constituent elements, examining when the 70 weeks were to end, and when they did end. You can go to my website, donkpreston.com, bibleprophecy.com, go to my website, or my store, and look up the DVDs or the downloads even on when did the 70 weeks of Daniel 9 come to an end, or when will they end. This is incredible stuff, okay? Avail yourself of that. Again, there's nothing else like it out there. It is powerful. But here's the point. Just like Hebrews chapter 9 and Colossians 2 and other passages teach that the temple would stand until the eschatological consummation, Daniel 9 teaches, okay? One more time, the argument is this. If it's true that Daniel 9 entailed the eschatological consummation, the arrival of the kingdom, the judgment, the resurrection, i.e. the bringing in of everlasting righteousness, which is the new creation. And if it is true that the 70 weeks would be fulfilled no later than the destruction of the city and the temple, then it must be true that the judgment, the resurrection, the new creation came no later than the destruction of the city and the sanctuary in AD 70. Catch the power of that? It's incredible. Now then, okay, I'm sorry. Daniel 9, verse 24, 70 weeks are determined to put away sin. Now, I pointed out for you last week and with you last week that many people go to this passage and say, see, Christ appeared at the end of the age to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. And I pointed out that what we have here is an already but not yet. It was not finished at the cross. That is a humongous mistake. Now remember, Daniel chapter 9 is concerned with the taking away of Israel's sin, the bringing in of everlasting righteousness, so that all men of every nation might come into that world of righteousness. You know, the world of righteousness that Peter was predicting in 2 Peter 3:13. That means it hadn't come yet prior to 2 Peter 3. Well, if the world of everlasting righteousness had not arrived, then sin had not been completely taken away. So, very, very quickly, 3 minutes left, 2.5 minutes left. 70 weeks are determined to take away sin. In Romans chapter 11, 25 to 27, the Lord reminded Israel of the promises of God, Isaiah 27, Isaiah 59, of the promise to take away her sin. When would that be? At the coming of the Lord out of Zion. Now look, folks, that little term, out of Zion, is used throughout the Tanakh, the Old Testament, to speak of God's coming in judgment. It is not a term that is used in reference to Jesus' incarnation. Now that's powerful. That's significant. It is important. So if Paul is using the term, and you know there's always possibilities changing the meaning of it up, we don't want to be guilty of illegitimate totality transfer, but if And I say if Paul is using the term out of Zion, like the Old Testament prophets repeatedly use it in reference to the Messiah, then the preponderant use of out of Zion in the Tanakh is the Lord's coming in judgment. The Lord's coming in salvation and judgment. You know, I had a guy accost me on YouTube just recently and say, Preston, you are absolutely wrong. Romans 11:25-27 has nothing to do with Christ coming in judgment. It is Christ coming in salvation, and that's different from his coming in judgment. Well, I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, that is just as wrong can be. Paul in Romans chapter 11, and next week I'm going to develop this more in depth, would be the fulfillment of the prophecy of Isaiah 27 and Isaiah chapter 59. And ever so briefly here, ever so briefly, Isaiah 27 and Isaiah 59 both foretold the coming of the Lord, yes, for the salvation of Israel. No question about it. However, that coming of the Lord for the salvation of Israel in both Isaiah 27 and in Isaiah 59 would occur at the time of the coming of the Lord in the judgment of Israel for shedding innocent blood. In other words, the time of the vindication of the martyrs. Now, wait a minute. If Romans chapter 11 is talking about the ultimate fulfillment of Daniel chapter 9, 70 weeks are determined to put away sin. If Romans chapter 11 is based upon, drawn from Isaiah 27, Isaiah 59, and Daniel chapter 9, that means you cannot get Romans chapter 11 beyond the fulfillment of the 70 weeks, which were fulfilled in AD 70. I don't have any more time for today, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry. We will pick this up again next week. Thanks for joining me.